Hi everyone, over the past 3 nights we've seen violence erupt on the streets of the north of Ireland. This has spread from Ballymena into Coleraine, Larne, areas such as Newton Abbey as well were included in the spread of violence following the horrific sexual assaults on the young girls in Ballymena. Now, this led to a peaceful protest that was held on Monday evening where thousands attended, and of course we thoughts and prayers are at the centre of this are the victims of these crimes that were committed against and brutal assaults against these young girls. Absolutely horrific. But we've seen massive demonstrations spark all over the north, and as I said, this is spreading pretty rapidly around the north of Ireland. And of course the politicians have come out with the usual response to appeal for calm. Now this is interesting because we've seen politicians being completely complicit in what's taking place and ignoring the issues, in particular around very deprived working class areas for many years, and paying lip service to the demands by pushing their neoliberal agenda. Much the same down south as north, where the Good Friday Agreement copper fastened sectarianism and of course pushed on this neoliberal agenda through the north also, caused major issues in society. But of course the response has been typical, to try and point the finger at the attacks that have taken place over the last number of days in terms of the violent attacks. Now obviously nobody condones any attacks on people, but of course fundamentally this is because people feel completely powerless, disengaged and left behind by the political establishment. It shows you there's very little power in society, and it doesn't derive from communities. We've seen communities being ignored because of the issues around mass immigration and not being engaged with, being spoken down to, being cancelled, being smeared and being called all kinds of names because they have genuine concerns, because they're left behind and they feel powerless and don't feel represented by the political system. And much the same in the north of Ireland, where you have so-called power sharing and essentially devolved Parliament from London and Westminster, where all the funding essentially comes through. Yesterday there was a grand announcement made about the Casement Park Stadium in Belfast, named after great patriot Roger Casement, which has been lying idle for well over 10 years. And it was a decision yesterday by the British government to hand over £50 million towards the reconstruction of the stadium. Now of course this goes nowhere near enough to provide the proper supports for that stadium, which is a fantastic location in Belfast. And of course this is part of the begging bowl that's always been pushed through Westminster, of course being copper fastened by these parties up the north. But what's interesting as well was the response from First Minister Michelle O'Neill, so much for political leadership in terms of the attacks in Ballymena. There was no mention of the victims of the sexual assaults. It was all about the aftermath in terms of, and no mention also of the peaceful assemblies and peaceful protests. It was all about the aftermath, and the politics of condemnation is alive and well in Ireland. Of course it's easy to do that rather than deal with the underlying issues of social inequalities, of communities left behind, rampant areas of deprivation across Europe in the north of Ireland. I did a video a number of weeks ago when I was up there in Belfast and saw firsthand what was happening to communities that were completely being left behind, whether Protestant or Catholic communities, all left behind by the establishment parties and the policies of Westminster and pushing their neoliberal agenda, much the same as what they're doing in the south. And of course there's next to no power in the south as well, because we have a party political system. There's no mention to in the constitution, but of course they're funded to the tune of about 20 million every year. That represents the interests of the very rich, don't represent the constituents. And that's part of the constitution, that they should represent the constituents. And all this Punch and Judy show that takes place in Dáil Éireann is nothing but theatre. Because fundamentally power rests with people. The people are sovereign, as Patrick Pearse wrote. And fundamentally we have to take power back to our communities, to people. And it starts by people having conversations, talking about the issues that are important, and becoming more politically aware to what policies are being pushed on people without any democratic oversight. And of course, the final arbiter of policy in the state, and we know it's a 26 county state, and we could talk about the formation of that, the history of that as well. We've seen the horrific abuses towards anti-republican forces back in the early 20s, all supported by the British establishment. And a copper fastened these massive divides on our great island of Ireland. So fundamentally, representatives, anybody elected, should be representing the needs of their constituents and not any party, corrupt party or private members club. And essentially that's what they've become, and they order and decide on their own policies and rules when they're meeting together, and their standing orders are all decided for themselves to benefit themselves, and people are more and more disengaged. And then they've devolved more power to Brussels in Ireland, and most policy is derived from at the behest of the key lobbyists. So this won't be discussed. Of course it won't be discussed, because it's easy and lazy and always a way to stigmatise working class communities and push people to the edge and to the brink, rather than engaging with people and understanding the bigger agenda of mass immigration in terms of a globalist agenda that's all about a race to the bottom and benefits the big employers, the very rich. And they'll be controlling the media, they'll be controlling the narrative and controlling the population against the interests of ordinary people. As Jim Larkin said, the mighty, essentially, to paraphrase him, or the great only feel powerful because we're on our knees. It's time we rise up off our knees and people stand up and speak the truth to what's going on in our society. A proud, strong history in Ireland as well, and it's absolutely horrific at the ignorance by the media, and of course the finger pointing and wagging by many of the media and political classes, and not to mention a number of people in society as well who are profiting from what is taking place. So thanks for supporting my videos, really appreciate them. And again, my thoughts, prayers are with the victims of those horrific attacks that have taken place up the north, and all victims of sexual violence and sexual attacks, sexual assaults all around the country as well. So take care, and please subscribe to my channel as well. So from Dublin, Slán, take care.